Reformed thinking. Welcome back. We're doing another deep dive today, looking at some sources you sent over that deal with the very first steps in Christianity. Specifically, we're going to be walking through the logical path C.S. Lewis lays out for us.
That's right. And Lewis is, well, he's a master at this. He builds an argument brick by brick. He doesn't just ask you to believe something. He wants you to see why it's the only logical conclusion.
So what's our mission today, specifically?
Our mission is to really get into a crucial and I think often misunderstood part of his argument. It's this idea that before Christianity can offer you any kind of comfort or relief, you first have to face something pretty unsettling about yourself.
The terrifying facts, as he calls them.
The terrifying facts, the reality of who we are when measured against a real absolute standard.
Okay, let's set the scene a bit. In his work, Lewis has already, made his case for a universal moral law, this idea that we all have an innate sense of right and wrong.
Right. We expect people to be fair, to be honest. We get angry when they aren't. That's the moral law in action. But the sources point out that this is the exact moment where a lot of modern readers just stop. They get annoyed. They feel like they've been led into what Lewis calls a religious jaw, a trap.
He completely saw that coming. He knew that people are generally okay with philosophy as long as it stays abstract. But the second it starts making demands on your life, well, that's different.
So this part of the argument we're looking at is his response to that resistance. He's trying to head off that evasion before it even starts.
Exactly. He's saying, okay, you've agreed there's a law. Now let's talk about what that actually means for you.
All right, so let's get into the first big hurdle he has to clear. It's a really common objection. The idea that religion is fundamentally a step backward.
Putting the clock back. That phrase captures it perfectly. The assumption is that history is a straight line of progress, and religion is something from the past we've moved beyond.
Like going from horse-drawn carriages to cars, and then someone suggests going back to the horse. It just seems regressive.
It does. And what's so brilliant about Lewis's approach is that he doesn't argue against progress. He doesn't say progress is bad. He accepts the idea, but then he completely redefines it.
He asks a very simple question. What is progress?
Right. And his answer is it's just common sense. Progress is getting nearer to where you want to go. That's it.
If your destination is north, walking north is progress. Simple enough.
But then comes the twist. This is where he turns the whole modern idea on its head. He asks, what if you've taken a wrong turn?
So if your destination is north, but somewhere down the road you accidentally turned east,
then continuing to walk east, no matter how fast or how confidently you walk, is not progress. You're actively moving farther away from your goal with every single step.
In that case, the most progressive thing you could possibly do is stop.
Stop, turn around, and walk back to the road you're supposed to be on. The most progressive action is to go backward.
It's so simple, but it cuts right through the noise. It feels like people today often mistake mere movement for progress. As long as we're changing, it must be for the better.
Well, Lewis would say that's just foolish. He uses these everyday analogies to make the point almost impossibly to argue with. Like his example with arithmetic.
Right, the math problem. I think this one is maybe the clearest. If you're doing a long calculation and you realize you made a mistake on the very first line, say you added 2 and 2 and got 5.
What do? Do you keep going, hoping that maybe another mistake later on will magically cancel out the first one?
Of course not. That's insane. You'd just be building a more and more elaborate wrong answer. The only logical, the only efficient thing to do is to admit the mistake.
And start over. You go back to the beginning. That's the fastest way to get to the right answer. It's the most progressive path.
So he's building this case that refusing to go back when you know you're wrong isn't a sign of being progressive or principled. He says it's just being pig-headed.
It's an irrational refusal to face reality. And then, once he's established that principle with these undeniable examples, he implies it to all of humanity.
That's the big leap. He looks at human history, at the wars, the injustice, our own personal failures.
And he just states it plainly. It is pretty plain that humanity has been making some big mistake. We are on the wrong road.
From a Reformed perspective, that's just a statement of fact about the fall. Humanity did take a wrong turn right at the beginning. But Lewis is arguing this from observation for anyone to see. Just look around.
Exactly. He's saying, just look at the evidence. Does this look like the right road to you? And if it's not, then the logical conclusion is that we have to go back. It's the quickest way to get where we need to be.
So you're forced into this uncomfortable position. You have to at least consider that your whole worldview, which is probably built on this idea of constant forward movement, might be based on a huge error.
And until you're willing to admit that, Any further steps you take are just taking you deeper into the wilderness.
Yeah, okay. So that sets the stage. If we've made a mistake, we have to turn back. But what mistake? And turn back to what? He's careful here, isn't he? He says he's not talking about the Christian God yet.
Not at all. He's very clear. All we've gotten to is a somebody or something behind the moral law. He says we're still trying to figure things out on our own steam, just using reason.
Which brings us to the next section. We're now in a deduction phase. We know there's a standard, this moral law. The question becomes, what can we deduce about the one who set the standard?
And Lewis says we have two main clues, two pieces of evidence we can examine to learn about the character of this being.
The first clue is the big one, the one everyone sees, the universe itself.
Right. The physical world, everything you see, touch, and experience. But he argues that if you only look at the universe, you run into a massive problem, a contradiction you can't solve.
Because it tells you two completely opposite things about its creator.
Exactly. On one hand, you look at a sunset, or the complexity of a cell, or the sheer scale of the galaxies, and you have to conclude that the creator is a great artist. The beauty and genius are just undeniable.
But that's only half the picture.
It's not even half, because then you have to look at the rest of it. You have to look at cancer, at parasites, at earthquakes and tsunamis that kill indiscriminately. The brutal reality of the food chain.
And when you look at that side of things, what do you conclude?
You conclude that the creator is quite merciless and no friend to man. The universe is a beautiful place, but it's also an incredibly dangerous and terrifying place that seems completely indifferent to our suffering.
So you're stuck with this paradox, a beautiful killer, an artist who builds a masterpiece and then seems to take pleasure in torturing the inhabitants.
And a lot of philosophies just get stuck there. Deism, for instance, or some forms of agnosticism. They see the evidence for a creator, but the problem of evil and suffering makes them conclude that he must be distant or indifferent or maybe even cruel. They can't resolve the paradox.
But Lewis says that's because you're only looking at one of the clues, and it's not even the best one. He says we have a second, better clue.
A more intimate one. The moral law itself, which he calls inside information.
Inside information. I like that. So why is it a better clue than the whole universe?
Well, this is where he uses that great analogy. He says you can learn something about a man by looking at a house he has built.
Okay.
You can see his skill, his resources, maybe his taste.
You can see if he likes big windows or strong walls.
Right. But you will learn a lot more about his actual character by listening to his conversation. The house is what he makes. The conversation is what he thinks, what he values, what he wants.
So the universe is the house. It's impressive, but it's external. The moral law. That's the conversation. That's him telling us what matters to him.
Precisely. And so what does this inside information tell us? What is this being interested in?
According to the law inside us, he's intensely interested in right conduct.
Not just in physics or biology. He cares about fair play, unselfishness, courage, good faith, honesty, and truthfulness. These are moral categories. They are about character.
So just using reason, we've moved from a powerful, artistic, but possibly merciless creator to a being who is, in a very specific sense, good. He values goodness, he commands it.
Yes. And we've done that without opening a Bible. We've just followed the logic from the clue inside our own minds. But this is the moment where Lewis slams on the brakes again.
Because as soon as we hear God is good, our minds immediately jump to our own definition of good.
We think of a kindly old grandfather. We think of good as being, soft, sympathetic, indulgent, someone who will always let us off the hook.
And Lewis says, whoa, not so fast. You can't make that leap. That is not what the evidence suggests.
No. This is where the comfort starts to fade and the unsettling reality begins to creep in. If our best clue to this being's nature is the moral law, then we have to look at the character of the law itself.
And what is the character of the moral law? Is it soft and indulgent?
Not in the slightest. Lewis's description is blunt. He says the moral law is as hard as nails.
Hard as nails. What does he mean by that?
It means the law doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't make allowances. It tells you to do the right thing, the straight thing, and it does not seem to care how painful or dangerous or difficult it is to do it.
So if a situation calls for you to risk your life to save someone, the law says, be courageous. It doesn't say, well, be courageous unless it's really scary.
Exactly. If it demands you tell the truth, even if it costs you your job, it demands the truth. It doesn't care about your financial situation. The standard is absolute. The difficulty of meeting it is, to the law, completely irrelevant.
So if God is like the law,
Yeah.
then God is not soft.
He is not soft. He is demanding. He is absolute. And he is, in that sense, utterly indifferent to our excuses for why we fail to meet his standard.
This just completely shatters the popular image of a God who just wants us to be happy and do our best.
It does. And it immediately creates a problem for the idea of easy forgiveness. We want to jump straight to a forgiving God, but Lewis points out a logical problem.
To have forgiveness, you need a person who can forgive. Have we gotten to a person yet?
He says it's too early to say for sure. Forgiveness is a personal act, an act of will, of relationship. What we've deduced so far is a power, a mind, something more like a mind than it is like anything else.
But a mind isn't necessarily a person.
No. And that leads to a truly terrifying possibility. What if the being behind the universe is a pure, impersonal mind, a cosmic force of morality, but without personality, without emotion, without mercy?
What happens to us then, the creatures who constantly break the moral law?
If the universe is run by an impersonal mind, Lewis says asking it to make allowances for you or let you off is completely pointless. And this is where he brings in that devastating analogy, the multiplication table.
Let's really unpack that. It's so powerful. He says asking an impersonal moral mind for forgiveness is like asking the multiplication table to let you off when you get your sums wrong.
Imagine you're doing your taxes and you write down that 7 times 7 is 52. And the auditor comes and you say, look, I was really tired that day. I was stressed. Can't you just let it slide?
What does the multiplication table say to that?
It says nothing. It doesn't have an opinion. It doesn't care about your excuses. It is an unbending, absolute system of truth. You are simply wrong, and you will get the wrong answer. You will face the consequences of your error.
There's no one to appeal to. It's just a system, an absolute truth.
A pure, impersonal mind that embodies the moral law would be just like that. It can't be petitioned. It can't be reasoned with. It can only state what is true and what the consequences are for violating that truth.
That's a chilling thought. We are judged by a standard we can't meet, by a judge who can't be swayed. Our natural instinct is to just reject that entirely, to say, I don't want a God like that.
Of course. But Lewis points out the contradiction in our own hearts, because even as one part of us rebels against this hard, absolute standard,
Another part of us is on its side.
yes, we absolutely agree with its disapproval of human greed and trickery and exploitation, especially when it's directed at us. We demand justice. We want the crooked politician to be punished. We want the murderer to be held accountable.
We want the standard to be absolute for everyone else.
Right. We know deep down that if the power behind the world was soft on evil, if it made excuses for injustice, then it wouldn't actually be good. A truly good being must hate evil.
And if the standard is absolute, then an absolutely good God must hate most of what we do.
There's the trap. Our own sense of justice demands a God who is hard as nails. But that same God, by that same standard, must condemn us. We have used our own reason to prove that we are in serious trouble.
We've built our own cage.
We have. And this is the logical climax of the first part of his argument. He calls it the terrible fix.
This is really the heart of the matter. He presents the reader with two and only two possibilities for how the universe works. And he shows that for us, both of them lead to hopelessness.
It's a perfect logical pincer movement. You can't escape it. He basically asks, okay, what kind of universe do you live in? One with a moral standard or one without?
Let's take the first one. Scenario A. Let's say there is no absolute goodness. The universe is not governed by a moral being. This is the materialist view.
Right. This is the conclusion you might come to if you only look at that first clue, the universe itself, with all its random cruelty.
So if that's true, what's the result for us?
The result, Lewis says, is that all our efforts are in the long run hopeless.
Hopeless. Why?
Because if there's no ultimate standard of good, then nothing ultimately matters. Your sense of justice, your desire for fairness, your acts of courage or kindness, they're just chemical reactions in your brain. Evolutionary quirks.
So all the striving for a better world, for justice, it's all just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The universe is a cold, meaningless machine, and eventually everything we value will be erased without a trace.
There's no final court of appeal. The bad guys often win and get away with it. The good guys suffer and die for nothing. It's a complete erasure of meaning. That's one kind of hopelessness.
A pretty bleak one. But for some, that might be less scary than the alternative. So let's look at scenario B. The universe is governed by an absolute goodness.
This is the conclusion we reach by following the clue of the moral law. This should be the good news, right? There is meaning. There is a standard.
But Lewis shows it's just as terrifying. Why?
Because if the standard is real and absolute, then our failure to meet it is also real and absolute. Under this scenario, he says, we are making ourselves enemies to that goodness every day.
We know the right thing to do, and we just don't do it. We are selfish when we should be selfless. We are dishonest when we should be truthful. And crucially, he adds that we are not in the least likely to do any better tomorrow.
That's the key. This isn't a problem we can fix with a bit more effort. It's a fundamental part of our nature. In our theological language, we'd call it total depravity. We are fundamentally bent away from God's standard.
So if we're constantly at odds with an absolute goodness who is hard as nails,
Then our case is hopeless again. We're doomed by meaninglessness in the first scenario, and we're doomed by justice in the second.
it's a perfect trap. There's no way out. We can't live with the standard, and we can't live without it.
That's the paradox. We cannot do without it, and we cannot do with it. The standard is the only thing that gives life meaning, but it's also the very thing that condemns us.
This forces us to see God in this terrifying dual way.
Yes, he is at the same time the only comfort, the source of all meaning and goodness, and the supreme terror, the absolute judge whose standard we can never meet.
He's the thing we need the most, and the thing we most want to run and hide from.
Because we know we're in the wrong. He is our only possible ally, but we have made ourselves his enemies. It's not a mistake, it's a state of being. We are in a state of rebellion.
And that's why Lewis is so dismissive of people who treat religion like a fun hobby. Those who talk as if meeting the gaze of absolute goodness would be fun.
He says they're still only playing with religion. They haven't grasped the seriousness of the situation. They think God's goodness is like a warm, fuzzy blanket.
When in reality, absolute goodness is more like a consuming fire.
It's either the great safety or the great danger. There is no third option. If you are aligned with it, you are safe. If you are opposed to it, you are in mortal danger.
And his conclusion about where we stand, naturally,
Is completely unambiguous, and we have reacted the wrong way. We're on the wrong side of the line. We are in the great danger.
So, after all this, we're left in a state of, well, total despair, which I guess is the whole point. And that brings us to the final section. Why did Lewis take this long, painful, roundabout route?
Because, as he says, Christianity simply does not make sense until you have faced the sort of facts I have been describing. The solution is meaningless if you don't understand the problem.
It's like offering a cure to someone who doesn't think they're sick.
Exactly. The core message of Christianity is twofold. Repent, and you will be forgiven. But what does that message mean to someone who doesn't think they have anything to repent of?
Nothing. It's an answer to a question they're not asking.
Lewis says Christianity has nothing to say to such a person. They think they're fine. They might have a few flaws, sure, but they don't feel they need radical forgiveness. They just need a bit of advice, maybe some encouragement.
So the sequence is absolutely vital. You can't skip a step. First, you have to see that the moral law is real.
Then, that there's a power behind it. And then, the hardest step, that you have broken that law and put yourself on the wrong side of that power.
Only after that, after you feel the weight of your guilt and the desperation of your position, only then can the Christian message even begin to be heard.
It's his doctor analogy. You only really listen to the doctor when you know you're sick, and you only begin to understand what Christians are talking about when you realize your situation is nearly desperate.
The good news is only good news if you've heard the bad news first. Without the terror of judgment, the offer of grace has no weight.
It becomes cheap. It becomes something you feel you're entitled to, rather than an astonishing undeserved rescue. Lewis is trying to restore the weight, the gravity of the situation.
Okay, so once the need is established, this desperate fix, Lewis says Christianity claims to offer the unique solution. It answers the paradoxes that reason alone led us to.
Right. He says it offers an explanation for 3 specific problems we ran into.
What's the first one?
The first is that internal conflict. How can we both love goodness in theory and hate it in practice? How can we know the law is good and yet constantly fight against it? Christianity have an answer for that.
The second is the philosophical problem. How can God be both the impersonal absolute standard, the multiplication table, and also a person who can love and forgive?
Which is a huge problem. We need him to be a person to get forgiveness, but the evidence of the law points to an impersonal, unbending mind. Christianity claims to reconcile those two things in one being.
And the third answer
Is the most practical one. It answers the question, how can the demands of this absolute law, which we cannot possibly meet, be met on our behalf? How can justice be served without destroying us?
And Lewis boils the entire Christian answer down to one single incredible
He
sentence.
does. The solution to all of it is this: God himself became a man to save man from the disapproval of God.
The incarnation. God the Son steps into creation, lives the perfect life we couldn't live, and takes the judgment we deserved.
It answers everything. He is both the absolute law, as God, and the forgiving person, as Jesus. His sacrifice satisfies the demands of justice. It explains how God can be both just and the justifier of the one who has faith.
So this brings it all back around to that warning about seeking comfort first. We see now that Christianity is, in the end, a thing of unspeakable comfort. But you can't start there.
You cannot start there. It does not begin in comfort. It begins in dismay. It begins in the terror of realizing you're on the wrong road, facing an absolute judge with no hope in yourself.
And trying to skip that part, trying to jump straight to the comfort.
Is a fool's errand. It's impossible. And that leads to his final, very sharp warning about what happens when you make comfort your primary goal.
He says comfort is the one thing you cannot get by looking for it.
It's a byproduct. It's not the goal itself. He says if you look for truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth is, you may find comfort in the end. Real comfort. Because it's based on reality.
But what if you look for comfort directly? If you choose a belief system simply because it makes you feel good?
He says you get neither comfort nor truth. What you get is soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair.
Why despair?
Because reality always wins. The multiplication table doesn't go away just because you wish it would. The moral law's standard doesn't lower itself to meet your performance. Sooner or later, your wishful thinking will crash against the rocks of reality, and the hopelessness we talked about earlier becomes your final state.
So, to summarize this entire logical path, it's a forced march away from self-deception. You start by admitting you're on the wrong road.
Which forces you to turn back and look at the evidence of the moral law. That evidence points to a hard, absolute goodness.
And that goodness, when compared to our actual lives, puts us in a desperate fix, caught between meaninglessness and judgment.
Which creates the necessary condition for true repentance, a real understanding of our need for rescue. And only then.
Only then does the gospel message register as the unspeakable comfort that it is.
Lewis saw this pattern everywhere. He makes a comparison to the years before World War II. People didn't want to believe war was coming. They engaged in wishful thinking about politics because the truth was too scary.
But eventually they had to wake up and face the terrifying facts of the situation. Their desire for peace didn't change the reality of the threat.
He's saying we have to do the same thing when it comes to our spiritual reality. We have to stop the wishful thinking. We have to face the terrifying facts of the moral law and our relationship to it, no matter how much we'd rather not.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really challenging thought to end on. It's a question of priority.
Are you looking for comfort, or are you looking for truth? Because Lewis's argument is that you can't have both if you start with comfort. You'll only end up with despair. But if you have the courage to start with the hard truth,
The terrifying facts about the standard and where you stand before it.
then and only then is there a path to a comfort that is real, lasting, and based on something more solid than your own wishes. It forces you to ask, have I truly faced the law, or am I still just playing games?
A lot to think about there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll talk to you next time.